Everybody, Regina Gonzalez back with you here on NewsNow from Fox. You're currently listening in to Senate Republicans address the media yesterday, talking about the COVID-19 relief bill. You specifically heard Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell and other senators make remarks saying that they are going to fight this $1.9 trillion stimulus bill in every way that they can. This is as President Joe Biden is urging Senate Democrats to stick together and pass the package quickly. So what exactly is in this package and how will this benefit Americans? What is the debate? Well, here to tell us all of that is Mr. Brandon Arnold. He is the Executive Vice President at the National Taxpayers Union. Mr. Arnold, how are you? Thank you so much for joining us here on News Now from Fox.
Hey, good morning. Thank you.
So we were just listening in to Senate Republicans talk about the bill. Can you let's take a step back for a minute. What are the nuts and bolts of this bill? We've got stimulus checks. We've got funding to state and local government. So can you tell us how Americans will benefit or not benefit from this bill?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge package. It's $1.9 trillion. So obviously you're talking about a lot of money going out the door. And a good chunk of that, the largest chunk, is over $400 billion for these stimulus checks. These are $1,400 checks that are going to go to people, supposedly capped at about $200,000. But then there's a lot of other provisions as well. There's a large pension bailout that was inserted by the House of Representatives, I think is wasteful. There's $350 billion going out to state and local governments. There's an expansion in the child tax credit. There's insurance expansion for health insurance through both Obamacare and private insurers. So there are a lot of pieces to this. It's hard to wrap your brain around all of it. But I think you need to look at some of the constituent parts here and think about how that will have a direct impact on people's day-to-day living. Obviously, things like the $1,400 checks are pretty popular. People are hurting. A lot of people are hurting right now. And to have a little bit extra spending cash or a little bit of extra money to help cover those utility bills or your rent, I think people would like to see, especially people that have been hurting due to the pandemic. But I think there's a lot of misplaced priorities in this bill. I mentioned there's about a $58 billion multi-employer pension bailout. This is a gift to the unions that was put in there by the House of Representatives. It was originally passed back in 2019, so it has really very little to do with the current pandemic and the ongoing economic crisis that we're facing. It's just a pet project of House Democrats. So I think things like that need to be trimmed out of this bill. It needs to be slimmed down and just directed toward things that are pressing needs of this country and small businesses and workers and people who are struggling.
And, Mr. Arnold, you mentioned the fact that this is a bit of a debate. Again, we just heard from Republicans. We've heard from Democrats. President Biden is pushing for this bill. There's a lot of a back and forth. So what is the biggest debate? A lot of Republicans are saying that this bill is too expensive. What does that necessarily mean?
Well, I think one of the things you can look at is the state and local aid. There's $350 billion in this bill for state and local governments. And some states are hurting. Some states are hurting pretty bad. They have major budget deficits, but other states are doing really well. You look at a state like California, it actually has a $15 billion budget surplus in California. And despite this bill would pass $26 billion to the state government. So I just don't understand why a state that's enjoying a surplus, and there are 22 states in this country right now that have budget surpluses because their economies haven't been hit as hard as expected. So why are we spending $350 billion giving federal dollars to states that are doing okay? To me, that doesn't make sense. I think we could address the issues facing state governments for a fraction of that, probably something to the tune of $16 billion. That's the kind of waste in this bill that I think needs to be addressed. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be trimmed out of the bill because it's kind of a freight train that's going down the tracks right now, and there probably won't be any kind of wholesale changes to it.
And, part of this bill is tax credits for families. So as the Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union, can you explain what that means?
Yeah, the biggest change that we're going to see is an increase in the child tax credit. The child tax credit was increased in the 2017 tax reform bill. It now stands at $2,000 per child. it's going to be bumped up to about $3,600 per child, slightly less for older children. So that's going to be a big change. It's a temporary provision. It's only in there for about a year, but that's going to be a big change for people that have families. This is an issue that's drawn a lot of attention. Senator Romney actually had a pretty comprehensive bill to increase the child tax credit and to phase out some other programs that aren't working so well, like the TANF program. It's a hot debate. I don't think the Democrats are looking at just a one-year extension here. I think this is an attempt to use this bill to have long-term policy changes. I would rather see this debated fully, and some of the other broken programs that are directed toward families, toward struggling workers, toward lower-income folks, see those fixed in the process of addressing what I think makes sense, perhaps in the interest of stronger families and taking care of people in the lower rungs of the economic ladder to bump up this tax credit, but to do so in a more fiscally responsible way than what the Democrats are doing in this bill.
Now, Mr. Arnold, the Senate is now evenly divided, which means all 50 Democratic senators will need to support the bill for it to pass. Do you think that this is going to pose a longer debate? How do you think the fact that the Senate is split evenly now will affect the voting?
Well, it'll be interesting. There's a lot of tension. There's rising tension between different parts of the Democratic Party. You see that played out over the issue of the minimum wage. The minimum wage was removed from the bill, or is going to be removed from the bill in the Senate. There are a lot of Democrats, Bernie Sanders being chief among them, that are trying to get it back in, but they don't have the support of their entire Democratic conference, and they're probably not going to be successful in getting it back in because people like Joe Manchin of West Virginia have expressed some disagreements with him. I think he wants to increase the minimum wage, but at a much lower level than what Senator Sanders and some of his more progressive colleagues would like to see. There are some additional moving parts that I think are still going to be worked out by the Senate. There's a discussion about lowering the economic threshold for people that are receiving these $1,400 checks. Right now, it's about $200,000. That could get dropped a little bit, and possibly increasing the generosity of the unemployment benefits. They're right now pegged at about a bonus of $300 per week. That could get inched up to $400 or perhaps even more. There's a debate that's taking place in the Democratic conference, and I'm not sure everyone there is on the same page. And then Republicans seem to be, by and large, strongly opposed to almost every component of this piece of legislation, so they're not going to get much help by reaching across the aisle here.
And, you know, my last question to you is the fact that the provision to raise the minimum wage was included in the bill, but now we're hearing that it's not. What is the latest on the debate regarding the raise in minimum wage for Americans?
Yeah, well, they're using a procedure here called budget reconciliation. It's a nerdy Capitol Hill procedure that basically allows them to circumvent the filibuster so they can get things done that they want with only 51 votes instead of 60 votes. But if you're going to use that rule, you have to follow the guidance of that rule. And that means that only things that pertain to the budget, spending, taxes, and so forth can be included. Minimum wage isn't directly related to spending. It's a different type of policy here. So whether you support it or oppose it, you can't use the reconciliation process to pass it. And that's what they tried to do. The Senate parliamentarian said you can't do it. So it was stripped out of the bill because they don't have 60 votes to include it. I don't think it's going to be included. There have been some plan B, is what Senate Finance Chairman Ron Wyden referred to. I just don't think there are the votes there. I don't think there's going to be a minimum wage increase as part of this package.
Gotcha. Well, is there anything else you'd like people to know about this bill as the Senate gets ready to debate this week?
Well, I think it's a little frustrating how this bill was set up. I mean, you look at the funding for schools. We all want schools to open as quickly as possible. It's very important to get children back in the classroom, provided that we can do so safely. So I think there's a lot of support for things like funding schools, make sure they have PPE and everything they need to open as quickly as they can. But you look at the $170 billion that was provided to schools, only 5% of that is spent this year when there is supposedly an acute need. Most of that money is going to be spent 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years from now. So again, a misplaced priority here. I think there would be bipartisan support for addressing immediate needs not just in the area of schools, but state and local aid, insurance, health insurance, making sure people have coverage, taking care of small businesses. But by doing this in a partisan fashion, I think they've made a lot of mistakes and had some misplaced priorities here, that just being one of them. So it's kind of an unfortunate process the way it's played out. They've already done multiple coronavirus packages. $4 trillion in spending has been approved, all on a bipartisan basis. I think they could do this in a bipartisan fashion.